Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. Stephanie, you are an international best-selling author, and your book more recently is Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. We'll get into that in a bit, but it was of interest to me that you have 35 years of aviation experience. You've literally gone from being a baggage handler to being the first African-American private aviation company president. You've served as Chief Growth Officer at Wheels Up and president at JetSuite, and you've led a team of private aviation's salespeople that beat their quota of almost $1 billion every year. Again, we'll get into a few of those. You've served on the boards of organizations of the likes of Make-A-Wish Foundation and the National Business Aviation Association, and I know there's a long list of accolades and places where you've been published, which I won't get into because it's quite extensive. I'm curious, with all that you've accomplished in the aviation world, why move or transition out into helping people with leadership and sales from a neuroscience perspective?
That's a great question. It is funny. I get a lot of different questions, but I don't think anybody's ever asked me that one. So I love aviation, and I still, to your point, I still have a foot in aviation. One thing that you didn't mention, I'm actually on a board for a company called XTI, which is a aviation manufacturing company. And so my foot is still very much in aviation. Absolutely love the industry. However, one of the things that there was a time that I would say back in 2013, 2014, where one of the companies that I worked for had sold our division. And so all of us on the executive team, as sometimes that happens, you get these wonderful packages and you get time to think about what I really want to do next. And that was it was a really great exercise for me at the time, Vinay, because what I did is I sat there and really thought about what it is that I absolutely love about the career. And what I found is that I loved, yes, aviation and planes and all the stuff that goes with it, but I really loved developing people. Like that was really what I loved the most. And so that put me on a different track. So yes, I still have my feet in aviation, but one of the things that I love most that gives me great joy is being able to be a leader who develops other leaders. And so where I have a fascination is anything that has to do with sales or leadership, and more importantly, the science of a communication. Because whether you're selling or you're leading, or I also speak on female power when I do my keynotes, any of those things require you to be a really effective communicator. And with so much information these days about how the brain functions and cognitive behavior and things of that nature, tying all of that together, the cognitive behavior, the trust, the neuroscience, what's the brain doing during a conversation, pulling all that together, I find to be really fascinating. I can get very geeky about it. But more importantly, I think it also makes people have a new competitive advantage because you realize it's not just about communication, but it's really all about what is the brain doing during a conversation. And so that's really, for me, I'm just fascinated. I think there are people that are probably just as fascinated that maybe don't know all the bells and whistles. And so I use a lot of my time and energy and resources and research to present communication in a different way so that we as leaders or salespeople or females can just simply be more effective, since we spend well over 90%.
And given your journey to date, I know you expressed an interest in developing people, but if I were to ask you in your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
You know what? It's my strength and my weakness, okay? Just in case you're going to ask me part two of that question. I'm very direct. And so that is a strength, and I'm intentionally direct because I never want people to have to sit there and waste time trying to figure out, did she mean this or did she mean that? So one of the things I pride myself on is being incredibly direct. The reason why I think that's also a weakness is because I have to also appreciate that not everybody likes things coming direct. Sometimes people want it couched a little bit more in a different format or a different way. And so for me, that's something that I continue to grow in, that I have to realize that just because I like direct information or feedback or conversation, therefore I deliver it directly because I just assume everybody wants to get to the point, right? It doesn't mean that that's the case. And so one of the things that I constantly have to remind myself is, okay, I know what I want to say, but are they the type of person that is going to receive it in the spirit in which it's intended? Or do I need to actually package this a different way so that I can be where they're at? One of the things, going back to your first question, when I created, and I know we'll talk about this later, I created a product called Neuroscience Selling, powered by conversational intelligence. And conversational intelligence is really your ability to have a conversation with someone, get their brain primed and prepped for success, partnership, and trust, right? So mutual success, partnership, and trust. So whenever I'm speaking to someone, I am, yes, direct, but I also have to be mindful that how do I prime their brain for what they feel like is partnership, trust, and mutual success? And that may require me actually throttling back on my directness and perhaps couching it a different way. So
I wonder if you
where
could
they're at.
expand on that by asking you this question, which is in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
So in
Yep.
regards to direct communication, yeah. So here's the thing. I believe that sometimes we as leaders just sell our people short. And we don't actually give them direct communication because we're not sure how they're going to handle it or can they handle it. But I would submit that usually they can handle it. If you think about it, let's just use employee engagement. Throughout the world, it's the statistics are horrible right now, but especially in the United States, employees just do not,
Mhm.
they're not engaged in the workplace. I think it's 30% are actually engaged. That's a horrible statistic. And that should be a red flag for leaders overall, right? Your people they're showing up, but they mentally have quietly quit, right? So they're not really there and they're not engaged or they're not excited about the work. So what that means to me is there's another research that I actually was looking at earlier this year, and it talks about the number one thing, Vinay, that people want, their employees want from their leaders, is they want us to be better communicators. Now, you would think that the number one thing they want from their leaders is more pay or better benefits or whatever, but that's not it. The number one thing they want is they want us to be better communicators. They want to have a higher level of conversation that connects. Because therefore, people, if you think of any relationship that you have that's worth value, the reason why that is your best friend or that is your most trusted confidant or what have you, I'm positive has a lot to do with your level of communication, right? You feel like you can speak, you can be heard, that you trust them, that they care about what you have to say. They give you the focus and the time and the energy whenever something's on your heart. That's what relationships and human connection is all about. So I believe that one of the areas that leaders could afford to be better, and where one of the reasons why I'm so focused on direct communication, is I don't want people to waste time, precious time, trying to figure out what it is that I'm talking about, right? Or what did I say? I said one thing, but I did something else. That's such wasted energy. And yet, if you think about most employees in typical corporate America, there is a lot of time, useless, unnecessary time they spend trying to decipher what exactly did the leader mean, right? And so that's for me, that's one of the things that I kind of want to, there's enough going on in the workplace that I think we all have more burdens and there's a heavy load to carry. So for me, the areas that I can make the burden less heavy to carry is where I'm focused. And so if that means that I have to be super direct so that everyone's clear on what I mean, that my yes is my yes, I said what I meant, what I said, that type of thing. I think the employees tend to gravitate towards that because then they can go, okay, then they can listen, make their decisions from
Yeah.
there, and then move on. We can all get back to the business. But so, yeah, I would just encourage leaders to don't be passive aggressive. Don't be talking code. Don't not talk at all. Just give them the benefit of the doubt and just be really clear with your communication because I think that is going to, they're going to be surprised as a leader how much that is actually.
Your book, and the title says Ally Leadership. Ally, I believe, stands for a framework, which stands for ask, listen, learn, and you take action.
You doing your homework, Vinay. That's exactly what it stands
Most
for.
leaders, I would think, believe that they're good listeners. But you've led billion-dollar sales teams where real listening made a difference between hitting and missing quotas. Can you walk us through what listening like a billion-dollar leader actually looks like in practice and how this type of listening directly translates
Absolutely.
to predictable revenue growth?
So I'll give you an example of when we were selling a jet to a customer. And I know this wasn't me as well, I was brought in as the leader because the salespeople felt like they couldn't get the guy closed. And so they're like, we're not sure what we're missing. Steph, can you come in? And so I had a great conversation with the customer. So it was the salesperson, myself, the prospect. Actually, he wasn't a customer at that point. But I'll give you an example about listening. Because sometimes, Vinay, that you're asking a great question. sometimes it's really about the things that are not being said, right? So there's listening for what's being said, but then it's the essence of listening, which is usually the most powerful words are actually the words that are not spoken, right? So I'll give you an example. So my team, they're trying to sell this gentleman on a jet. The jet was $20 million. The guy had the means. He had so money wasn't an issue. He had the need, right? So he had everything. And that's why they were troubled. Like, why can't we get this guy to close? So I go into the meeting with the gentleman and I start asking questions. Now, I'm not asking questions about his needs for flying or where he's flying to or how many passengers, all that stuff I already knew had already been asked. I started asking questions about his childhood and his upbringing. And by uncovering just and having him talk, one of the things that I found out is that this gentleman was born and raised very poor. And so he came from like nothing. Okay. And he shared when he was telling me the story about just his upbringing and how he lived in a trailer park and just all the things that went on in his life. Now here I am sitting in his beautiful mansion, the huge estate, so on and so forth. But he said to me, he says, we have a nanny for the kids. And my family doesn't know that. They would be so disappointed to hear that I have a nanny. And I was like, okay. Now that had nothing to do with the jet, but if you're listening to what's being said there, right? So that was something he talked about, and he went on. And so I started to dig a little bit deeper. Oh, that's interesting. So your family doesn't know that you actually have a nanny that helps out with the kids. No, oh my gosh, like we didn't grow up that way, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I let him keep talking. And at the end of the day, what I realized is though he had the money and he had the need, his financial belief wasn't there. So he just wasn't there. And what I mean by that is he grew up having nothing. Now he has something, but he's afraid to tell his family that he has something. So if he can't communicate to them that he has a nanny, there is no way he's ready to communicate that he just bought a $20 million jet. So what I ended up talking to him is I said to him, I said, you know what? Because then I started asking deeper questions. And that's where we both arrived at is just, yes, it wasn't even about the price of the jet. He had it already, but it was more about his financial belief and where he was at. And so what I shared with him is I said, listen, here's what I would tell you. I don't think you should buy this jet right now. I think whenever you need to fly privately, let's just charter you here and there. And then when you're ready, because I don't think you're ready yet, when you're ready, we'll be here. And then at that point, we can readdress the conversation and see if the jet makes sense for you to purchase. Right now, just rent one whenever you need one type of thing, right? It's less of a commitment that way. Now, of course, my salespeople were ready to choke me out because I'm not supposed to close the deal. And I'm telling the guy, you don't want this jet just yet. You're not ready. But you know what, though, Vinay, and I'm sure that you can appreciate this, the reason why you're able to sell billions of dollars or lead teams that sell billions of dollars is because there's an integrity issue in that as well. And yes, could I have tried to wrangle this guy into buying something that he mentally wasn't ready for? Sure, I could have given it a college try, but that's not the right thing to do. And so there's the listening, right? Not with what's best for me, but there's the listening of also what's best for them. Because as a salesperson, my job is not to sell you something that you don't need. My job is to actually understand what it is that you need and help you solve that problem. What he needed was to get back and forth sometimes to wherever he was going. That's what he needed. I can help solve that problem with him chartering a jet versus buying a jet, right? Now, that then gives us the ability, because he knows we weren't trying to sell him something or shove something down his throat that he needed. That then raises up our credibility, gets him to trust us. And though it's not something that he was ready to buy, he had friends that were ready to buy. So now he's referring people to us and so on and so forth. So what I would just say when you think about communication is not just words being spoken. Communication really does start, especially in the sales process, the very first 5 stages of sales. But stage 1 is you've got to build trust and rapport. That's stage 1. If you can't get that accomplished, the rest of the steps don't matter. And one of the ways that you do that is to understand what is trust, and then how do I work within that. And trust is a big part of communication. And so if you think about trust from a neuroscience perspective, when I speak on stage, I talk about this a lot, that we can have conversational intelligence, right? I had said earlier is how do I prime your brain for trust, partnership, and mutual success? So when I'm having a conversation, I'm trying to build that trust up very quickly with people. And one of the ways that I can do that is to realize that whenever you're having a conversation, I can create an environment where I can raise up the positive chemicals in your brain so that the conversation feels very pleasant to you. Or I can certainly raise up negative chemicals that the conversation feels very put offish to you. And so if you think about just sales in general, most people, when they think of salespeople, their guard's already up, right? My job is to get that guard down. And how I can do that is to really come and ask you questions that are going to allow or to be very mindful of how I can get your positive chemicals up so that this is a positive experience and not a negative experience. I don't need to sell you something.
So, in the example you just gave, you're pretty much the expert in the room. And I think a lot of CEOs and C-suite players would certainly identify with that. What, in your opinion, is the hardest part about asking genuine questions, even say in a sales team meeting? And how does this shift the ability to actually drive revenue results?
Yeah. So I'll answer that two ways. So one of the hardest parts of asking questions, I think, when you're a leader, is taking the time. But leaders are so busy and we're running around just because there's so much going on in the world. And so just taking the time, like slowing down enough to truly ask the questions and keep asking questions and keep going deeper and deeper in the questions so you can truly hear what it is. Like you can really hear the real issue. That takes time. And most leaders just don't have time because listen, where you're located, you may have different challenges, but in our country, every leader for the most part is trying to retain top talent or attract top talent or just have talent, right? Because we have a labor shortage as well. And then on top of that, you've got terrorists, you've got wars, you've got geopolitical stuff going on. There's just so much happening that leaders are really stretched thin. And so when they may hear me say now the hardest part of leadership or communication is just finding the time to communicate. It sounds so simple. Let me just ask you a question, but developing people isn't simple. It takes time and it takes you more than just doing drive-by conversations. Right? Oh, how's this report? And then I read it before you can answer it. That's not going to develop them as a future leader. And it's certainly not going to be a good conversation as far as active listening is concerned, so on and so forth. So that's the first thing is I think leaders just are really running short on time. And so everything I'm saying sounds simple enough, but I also can appreciate that they've got a lot on their plate. And so time is the wish they had more of, right? So that's issue number one.
With this issue of time, again, in the example that you used, you're going into a meeting with someone who I imagine is fairly busy. And I think a lot of sales folk would identify with the idea of wanting to be respectful of a person's time. Yet you take the time to ask questions about a person's childhood. That's something that most people would do. Why did you go there? And could you explain the process of what you were thinking in order to set up a different sort of vibe or environment?
Yeah, a couple things. One is one of the ways that you can raise people's dopamine, which is the feel-good chemical, is just to talk and ask them questions about themselves, right? That's one of the reasons why we all like to talk about ourselves. Because it actually raises our chemicals and we feel good about it. When you're talking to someone, especially an executive, most people want to talk about the business, right? Or the results and all that stuff is important. But I personally would much rather talk about the person. Like I'm doing business with a person. And so I'd much rather have that conversation. That's the first thing. Second thing is when we think about business, I'm trying to build a long-term relationship, right? I don't want to just sell you one thing and then never see you again until it's time for you to renew, right? Which is mistake number one, salespeople. You always stay close to your folks. But because of the industry that I'm in, where you're dealing with a high net worth individual, they're not used to being told no. Nobody tells them no. And they have the money to buy whatever they need. So money's never the issue. But here's what's really interesting about that particular type of client is that they're incredibly inquisitive, right? And so they actually want to know about you and your upbringing, where you're from, and so on and so forth. They're incredibly inquisitive. So when you know that, then you want to have a different conversation because everybody else is having a conversation about your business and your P&L, how's your EBITDA and what country you're going into and all that stuff, basic business stuff. Not a bad conversation, but it's not a conversation that's going to make me stand out, right? Because everybody else is having that conversation. But a conversation where I can get to know the person and I can really talk to them about, wow, that's interesting. Like, where did you grow up? Where are you from? And then going deeper and deeper because people will start to open up more. that opening up is going to tell me more than I couldn't have positioned a question for what's your financial belief? That's not a question I can ask. But what I can do is ask questions that are around there that will allow me to get deeper and deeper. So get below the surface, right? So that I can truly understand what it is that you need. I'll give you another example. This is when I was selling for the airline. And I remember I had a gentleman call me, and it was a big company. And this particular company was with one of my competitors. And so the reason why they were meeting with me is because the airline that they were currently with was just constantly messing up and their on time performance was horrible. And so this particular gentleman was looking for an alternative because he was just tired of it. So he brings me in to talk about what my airline could do for them, right? Now, he starts off with, I'm with XYZ carrier. They're always having mechanicals. They're always late and their on-time performance is really crappy. You guys are having a good on-time performance. I want to talk to you about perhaps switching. Now, here's the truth of the matter. On-time performance is rated based on 15-minute increments, i.e. 15 minutes past your schedule. I could have a great on-time performance right now because maybe where my aircraft are headquartered or where my hubs are headquartered, maybe the weather is working in our favor. But next month, I too could have a horrible on-time performance. One snowstorm, one hurricane, and I'm just as bad as this other guy, right? So I know again, if I wanted to, I could ride the wave because right then and there, we were having a good on-time performance. But if I think of a long-term relationship and give them that level of respect, then I don't want that to be the one thing that differentiates us. It's just not sustainable, right? Planes break, people make mistakes, so on and so forth. So what I had to do was to get the conversation into something different. So yes, I understand on-time performance. You're mad about it. I got it, right? Now what I'm going to do is start asking this person questions that goes much further down. So it gives me more understanding as to why am I really here? It can't just be on-time performance. So I started off with the surface stuff because I just met this person. So wasn't going to start talking about the childhood just yet. But as I started to go deeper, some of the questions that I asked him is I said, so I understand that on-time performance is an issue. Got that. I'd love to hear some other things like when those things happen, walk me through what happens from your side of the fence when one of your planes are delayed or one of the flights are delayed. And what he shared with me, Vinay, is the fact that the way that their company, and this was like 20 years ago, so they are way ahead of their time. Work-life balance was something that was really important to that company. So because of what they did, which they really, for the most part, they built like big industrial plants type of thing. And so they would send a team out on Mondays to then go work in some remote area. And then on Thursday, they would fly them back to wherever they lived. Because this company, it was so important to them that their folks be with their families Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then fly out again on Monday, right? And now what was happening is because the planes were late on Monday, people weren't able to get to the job till Tuesday. Now all of a sudden you can't get there till Tuesday, you can't leave till Friday, and now I've just left you with Saturday, Sunday. It messes up their entire, this is who we are as a company, right? And so that was issue number one. So as he's talking to me about it, I was like, okay. So I said, now help me understand when that happens and your folks can't get there now till Tuesday, what's the financial impact of that? And of course he was like, oh my God, it's the budget, it's this. And so he went on and on. The more he talked, the madder he got. And then I said, okay, now tell me what the non-financial impact is on that. I understand what the financial impact is, but what's the non-financial? And he says, my colleagues, they get upset because not only am I messing up our budget, I'm messing up their budget as well because their people now are complaining because they don't get home till Friday. And now that's messing up because they're missing their kids' soccer game. And so now he goes on into the non-financial pieces of it, right? So I let him get that all off his chest. And I said, how does that make you feel? And I said that your folks are coming in here questioning you, saying, don't you have control of the airline relationship? Why are my people, not only am I over budget, my morale, and now I have a morale issue. And so how does that make you feel? And he said something really interesting. He said, it makes me feel like an idiot. It makes me feel like my colleagues don't trust me and I don't know what I'm doing. So now it's really not about on-time performance, right? So as I continue to ask more questions with him, and I said, listen, so what would be the ideal scenario for you? Because I said, I don't want to come in here and tell you our planes are never going to break, or we'll never have bad weather, or we'll never have an on-time performance. That would be irresponsible of me. That we will have that too. But what would make your job easier? So knowing that's going to happen on our end too, what else would make your job easier? And now we could sit there and have a conversation, because Vinay, what would make his job easier is if in fact we're going to have a delay, that he learns about it first, not his peers come screaming at him because their people are stuck somewhere. So that he wants to know first, and then he wants to know what we're doing, and he wants to know how it's going to be fixed. And then that way he can go to his colleagues and say, listen, this plane just took a delay. Your people are going to be 4 hours late getting in. Here's how we're fixing it. Here's what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. And so that's not an unreasonable ask. All of us would want that, right? And so by spending the time to have a conversation that wasn't the basic conversation that every other airline was going to have. Oh, you have horrible on-time performance over there. We're going to do better. I'm like, you know what? Actually, I don't know if we're going to do better. We're going to try, right? But what I can tell you we could do is when we screw up, not if, when we screw up, here's how you and I are going to handle it so you never look like an idiot in front of your peers. So that's just what, that's an example of what I mean by conversational intelligence. You've got to set everybody's brain up so that it's a mutual partnership, a mutual trust, and a mutual win. And by doing that, it's just a matter of asking the questions that most people don't want to ask because they don't want to take the time, or they just want to win the deal. But if you think about sales as a long-term partnership, I don't want to just win the deal. I want to win your deal, and I want you to go tell all your friends about me, so I win their deals too. So it's just a different way of looking at it, but it has served me well, and that's how I teach and train every other sales leader, person, executive, so on and so forth.
The you take action part of Ally, this seems like where rubber meets the road. You've mentioned that awareness without action is useless. Can you share a specific example of how taking action based on what you've learned through asking and listening directly resulted in a breakthrough revenue performance for one of your teams?
So let's see, a taking action, that breakthrough performance. I'll give you an example. So when I think of, especially as we get into the beginning of the year, Q4, Q1, right? So if you've ever led a sales team, or even quite frankly as a leader, just run companies, and so you still have to have the same conversation, where you're done with the board and everybody's made a decision as to, okay, this is what our numbers are going to look like for next year. And so one of the examples that I would give is, so let's say the times that I was leading sales team, and so my CEO would say, Steph, okay, you got it. You were there at the board meeting. We have $1 billion quota this year. And okay, got it. Now, that's my quota. I'm the head of sales, right? So now I've got to go and sell this to the sales team, because that quota is probably an increase from last year, right? And you want to get salespeople all wigged out, give them an increase in quota. So now what it happens is, this is how I would always handle it. And this is why the you take action is important. Is I would sit there with the sales team and say, okay, guys, listen, just finished the board meeting. Here's our quota for this year. Here's why the number has increased. And yeah, this is a big number, but I could really use your help in figuring out how we're going to hit it. So that's step one, is not me sitting there going, okay, $1 billion quota, let me sit in my C-suite tower and come up with the plan and then dish it out to everybody. The quota is mine, but it's also theirs as well. And so what I want to do is I want to tap into all the talents that I've got on my team. And so I'm going to, one, ask the question, hey guys, here's where we are. I could use your help on how you think we should get there. Then I'm going to, two, listen, right? So now they're going to say, we could do this or we could do this. And so now I'm giving them a platform to have a healthy debate. And so write it on the whiteboard. Everybody has ideas. Now, here's where most leaders go off the rails a little bit, Vinay, is they will then stop. When ideas come, they're going to stop the idea, right? That's not the time. I'm asking for their help. So they're giving me ideas. Now, some of those ideas I know may be crazy and there's no way we're going to be able to do it, but now's not the time for me to put a stop on. Right now, I'm just letting everybody come up with all their ideas and slap them on that whiteboard. So I'm listening. Now, from there, at the end, I would say, okay, guys, listen, fantastic. Really appreciate the courage that it took to just, some of these ideas are really different. And I love the fact that we're thinking outside the box. This is great. Now, we can't do all 50 of these ideas clearly, right? So let's narrow this down to 2 a quarter. So if you guys can, let's have a debate about what, out of all these ideas, what are our top? Now I'm going to shut up again, right? And let them go and defend their decisions, their thoughts, their everything. And so there's a lot of power that comes in that, because listen, people will always defend an idea that they've thrown out. And now they've got to have a healthy debate about it. Then when they're done, and this is, again, as leaders, don't stop the conversation, right? I'm trying to grow not just salespeople, I'm trying to grow them into business executives, right? And so I want them to be having a holistic conversation about what works, what doesn't work, why that's a great idea, why that's not a great idea, et cetera. Then when they're all done with that, I'm going to commend it again. Hey, listen, okay, this was fantastic. Loved the courage it took to challenge each other. So here's our 8 ideas. So now let's talk about with your individual territories, what can you do? What's going to be your plan to put these 8 practices into place so that you exceed your quota? Now you give them that opportunity because now they're taking it, slicing it down to their specific territory. So what I've done by doing that, right, Vinay, is I've asked the question, they do what ideas, I've listened, and now I've learned what to them is the top 8. Great. Now we do have to take action. So you create your action plan of how this is going to work for your specific territory. And now what I'm going to do is hold you accountable. So me taking action, this is a different way of me taking action. It's actually me allowing you to take action, right? So now when I'm sitting down with each individual salesperson, listening to their action plan on how they're going to crush their quota, this is where me taking action comes into play. So taking it one step further, me say, okay, this, you know what, your plan looks good, or maybe I have some questions here and there, whatever, but we're halfway there. Then what I'm going to ask is to say, and I used to do this all the time. So let me ask you, when you exceed this quota, you're going to make roughly, what's the quota? What's that commission number look like? Because I know they've already crunched it, right? So they're going to say, oh, that should bring me an X amount of bonus this year or whatever. Oh man, that's awesome. So tell me, what do you plan on doing with that? Because that's exciting. That would be the most you've made. And so I remember doing this with one of my salespeople, and he was like, there was this particular Harley that, and I don't know anything about Harleys, but he just lit up every time he talked about this Harley and how he wanted to use his bonus for buying this particular Harley. And he told me all the bells and whistles about this Harley. None of it meant anything to me because I don't know anything about Harley, but I was engaged in the conversation. And so by the time he was done talking about it, I said to him, I said, okay, so that's what you're going to buy when you crush your quota this first quarter. Yep, it's this custom-made Harley, blah, blah, blah. Fantastic. I said, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the Harley-Davidson dealership. I want you to test drive it. I want you to take a picture of you test driving it. And I want you to come back and tell me all about the experience. Yeah, okay. So send them off to do that. Come back. Here's Steph. Here's the picture. Here's the, now he's even more excited. Here's how you take action as a leader to bring in real results. And I can see my thing is, hopefully you can see me. I'll finish this story, but it looks like my lighting's getting weird. So what from there, guess what I talked to him about every week as we were doing check-ins and one-on-one? I was never talking about the quota. I was always talking about how are you doing with the Harley. That's me taking action in a different kind of way. Because he cares about the Harley, he doesn't care about crushing the quota, right? So if I say focus on me asking, listening, learning, and taking action regarding this Harley, he's going to hit the number that I need, but he's going to have a much better experience doing it. He and I are going to have a conversation that builds trust, mutual success, partnership, all of those things when we think about conversational intelligence. So everybody wins. And the conversation is just it's just me not talking about a quote. It's just me talking about this Harley, but we get to the same place. That's how you can take action and actually drive a result. By the way, he did crush his quota. And it's interesting. He decided not to get the Harley, but get married instead. And so the money went towards this wonderful wedding. And again, I don't care, right? What you do with it. All I care about is the result. And so that's an example of how you can have a conversation and really have a different type of conversation so you can get a different type of result. That's what I challenge leaders to do all the time, whether it's you're leading somebody who's not like you or you're doing neuroscience, whatever. If we spend statistically, leaders spend 97% of their day in conversation. It's important that you know how to have it effectively, because once you know how to have it effectively.
Absolutely. Just listening to what you're saying, and from my own experiences, I would say that most leadership frameworks focus on processes. But listening to you, Ally seems deeply personal and relational. So for, say, a B2B tech founder who is scaling from startup mode where they know everyone personally to leading teams of, say, 50 to 100 plus people, how would you recommend that they maintain the personal connection that makes Ally work while driving systemic revenue growth?
Yes. Thank you for that question. Because I do believe if you care about your people, so the way that I structure Ally is the framework, but earn is really, I always tell them that's the system that you use in order to get the result. So earn is another acronym. You can tell I love acronyms, right? Just it makes things easy to remember. So the earn system, which is what I've done always when I have a low performing team and I've got to get them to perform, I use the earn system. Earn is an acronym and it stands for stands for establish an environment. And I'll go back and give you all the details of this. Establish an environment is E. A, assure alignment. R, rally the troops. And N, navigate the narrows. When you think about if you're a tech person, you start off with 5 people, now you got 50 or 100 or 5,000. How do you keep that connection? The first thing is that you want to establish an environment where your people feel safe enough to be able to share their thoughts and their ideas and challenge the status quo. Because one of the things is as the business gets bigger, you're going to need better processes and you're going to you start getting into a compliance complacency type of way. But you want innovation, right? So you want to make sure that you create a safe enough space that your people can challenge the status quo or challenge you if we want to keep it really real, right? So that's the first part. Because what tends to happen is you've got so many great people that, you've hired, you've brought them in. And then they start getting a little nervous to share their thoughts, especially if their thoughts are contradictory to everybody else's thoughts, right? And so part of where I'm really passionate about establishing an environment is when you're trying to lead people who are not like you, and which is pretty much everybody these days, right? You want to create an environment where people feel like they belong. And so as a founder, if you had 5 people, one of the reasons that they were probably all running around and excited is because they felt like they belonged. They felt like they were building something special. They understood what the cause, the vision was, and they were jumping on board right there with you. That gets to be a little bit harder as the team gets bigger, right? Responsibilities get bigger, dollars and cents get bigger, boards, investors start getting into it's just a different challenge. So how you help hang on to that is to establish an environment where people feel psychologically safe to be able to share their thoughts and their ideas and challenge the status quo. A means assure alignment. So using your example as a tech founder, I want to make sure everybody's aligned as to where is the company, why does the company exist, right? Why are we here? And more importantly, how is it that you contribute that helps us, right? So when we think of assuring alignment, I always tell leaders, go find 5 people in your company and individually ask them these 3 questions. Ask them, what business are we in? Now, that may seem simple, but I promise you, most of your people don't know what business you're in, right? How does the business make money? And then how does what you do contribute to helping the business win? If you can have your people know the answers to those 3 questions, # you're already winning. And so that's how you keep that. It seems so simplistic, but as the company gets bigger, you have to get more dogmatic about making sure that everybody knows, the left hand knows what the right hand's doing, why we're here, how do they contribute, what business are we in, how do we make money? All of that is a sense of belonging for people because they feel like they're working for something bigger than themselves. And that leads me to R, which is rally the troops. You want to give people something that gets them excited to show up, something bigger than their to-do list, right? People follow a vision. They don't follow a to-do list. And so your job as a leader is to paint that vision. And then the end part of the whole thing is to navigate, because you want the team to know where are we going and why. Most people may be able to quote off, okay, here's what we're trying to get done this year, but they probably don't know the why. So don't just tell them the what, tell them the how and the when and the why. But so where are we going and why? How are we going to get there and by when? And then the most important part is, listen, we all hit turbulent times. So they need to know what's the process when the rough air hits? What's the backup plan? So that's why the earn system is really important, because the Ally is a framework, right? Ask, listen, learn, you take action. But how you put that into a system is you create the earn system so that now this is exactly how we're doing this. Because once that happens, so if you're the tech leader and you have a team of 5 people and you're trying to keep that cohesiveness and that special secret sauce that you had when it was just 5 people, but now you got 5,000 people, how you do it is to make sure that everybody feels like they have a sense of belonging there, that what they do matters, and that more importantly, how they contribute, it helps the team win. And they just have to be really clear. A lot of times what happens is the bigger the company gets, the more the leaders are busy and they don't go back to the basics of communicate, right? And so once people, if you can stay, that's what allowed you to be cohesive in the first place, is the 5 people could just talk to you directly and hear directly from you. Now you got 5,000 people, so that's not no longer feasible. And once a month or all hands meeting isn't cutting it, right? What you're going to have to do is to make sure that you create an environment where people realize, oh, communication is our thing. And so nobody should be wandering around there trying to figure out what are we doing and why are we here, what's going on. And that's how most companies function right now. Most employees couldn't tell you the basics. What business are you in? How's the business make money? I promise you, I challenge your listeners, go do that. Hit me up on social and let me know how it goes, because I promise you, you're going to be shocked at the information.
I would agree with you on that one from my own personal experience. I'm just trying to get a little bit of clarity and perhaps granularity for those listening in. When you've got a large team and you want to keep that level of communication and culture going, would you recommend that you have your team leads actually document some of these conversations in some sort of format to ensure that it is not ignored or put aside because of the busyness of life and business, of course, but is actually at the forefront and a really good talking point, as you have done with that salesperson who is interested in the Harley?
Yeah, absolutely. Share those kind of conversations, right? Because it becomes much more intimate and people feel like they're there for a bigger reason. Another thing I would encourage that I've done in the past that has been hugely successful, and I would encourage your listeners to do this, especially if they're leaders or founders and whatnot, is every business I've ever run or any department I had to go and oversee, is I would always do a walk a mile. And so a walk a mile is something that I swear by. And really what a walk a mile is, my focus is how do I get this business functioning like one unit, right? And of course, in a business, there's all these different business functions. So they tend to function in a silo unit, right? But I need them functioning as one big unit because we're trying to accomplish one big goal, right? And so with that said, doing walk a miles is really important. So a walk a mile means that I'm going to have everybody walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So part of our culture is that you're going to go and sit in, let's say you're in finance, you're going to go spend time in marketing, right? Not a lot of time. I don't need you to become a marketer. I just need you to understand what marketing does, right? If you're in sales, like sales, everybody who's ever worked for me in sales would tell you I'm crazy about this part. Sales has to spend time with finance. Now, if you think of any organization, usually sales looks at finance as the sales prevention department, right? I think most salespeople are not in love with finance, right? But it's because they don't understand what finance is looking at, right? So I've always been the type that makes sure that sales and finance spend time together, because I do want my salespeople to know what business are we, how does the business make money? Because if they know that type of information, a lot of times what happens, Vinay, is leaders are afraid to tell them too much, right? I just don't want to tell them so much. But I want my salespeople not to be salespeople, but to be business executives, to understand how the business works, which is where the walk a mile comes in. Because if you understand, I'll give you an example. I remember we used to have one of our planes that would make a 20% margin. And the salespeople would go, I don't know why finance is giving me a hard time if I'm just asking for a 2% discount, right? We make it 20%. I only want 2%, and finance is giving me a hard time. Because in their mind, it makes logical sense. But when you spend time with finance, goes, well, yeah, but that 20% has to pay for this. So when it's all said and done, it's not we're making 20%, we're making 3%, and you're asking me to take 2%. So it changes the whole conversation. So now all of a sudden, if the salesperson knows that, so some leaders may argue you're telling them too much. I want the salesperson to know that, because what then I have seen time and time again is when the salesperson's sitting there across from the customer or the prospect, and the prospect wants a 2% discount, the salesperson knows enough about how the business works to shut that conversation down, right? I'm not going to be able to give you a 2% discount. Here's why. Here's why we have it priced at what we have it priced at. Here's where we believe our value is. Now, if you're trying to bring that pricing down, then let's figure out what we need to take off the table that you don't need so that we can bring this down to something that fits your budget a little bit better. Would that be okay? Of course, the customer's like, no, I want all of this. I just want you to bring the pricing down. That's not how this works, right? So now I've set the salesperson up to be able to have a high-level conversation because they understand how the business works. It's not just about, oh, they know their quota. I don't want you just knowing your quota. I want you knowing how this business works. That's not something you can put off on the employees to go figure it out. That's the job of the leader. And so for me, that's why doing walk miles was always very important, because I want everybody in the company to be quite aware. Two things. One, on this company, you are your brother and sister's keeper. So we're either all going to win or we're all going to lose. This is our decision, right? But the second part is by forcing people to spend time in other departments and sit there and listen to a phone call from customer service and understand all the steps they have to do in order to book a trip, right? Then I used to do this with my pilots all the time. Pilots, they're an interesting breed, right? Because they're like a surgeon in the sense of they truly have souls in their hands when they're flying. And so they may just think about getting on the plane and flying, and that's all they care about. But you're part of the business. So I want you to care about that piece, sure. But I also want you to care and understand what are all the steps that are needed in order for you then to be able to get a passenger on a plane so you can get on the plane and fly. There's a gazillion steps that happen before that. If you don't know any of them, then all you care about is your one step, getting on the plane and flying. But when I make you do a walk a mile, and all of a sudden now you've got to sit there with customer service Kathy, right, and listen to her ask the customers what it is that where thhey're going, what type of hors d'oeuvres or drinks would they like on the plane, and blah, 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 all of the steps. And then you watch Kathy go through literally the 20 steps she needs to process in order for that trip to be a flawless trip, so that when you get the customer on there, the customer's already happy, right? You're not dealing with the customer locked inside of a plane who's mad, right? So all of the different steps happen. Now, all of a sudden, that pilot he or she won't just be waiting for, I need my trip sheet so I can go. They're like, oh, if I don't have my trip sheet yet, maybe Kathy needs some help. Kathy, what can I do? Hey, are you backed up on something? Right now, there's a bigger relationship. We're all trying to win, right? And of course, we're trying to create an environment for the customer to have a wonderful experience. So everybody needs to win in this process. But I would just really encourage leaders. The biggest game changer that I've seen and that I've had when overseeing companies is to do the walk a miles. Take the time, make it mandatory that everybody has to walk a mile in each other's shoes, because now you have a much more educated workforce who understands how the business works. And therefore, when you're doing your job by communicating with them, not just at the all hands, but making sure that they're constantly in the know, what business are we in? How does business make money? How does what you do contribute? All of that happening all the time. Leadership doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be as hard as it is. If we leaders would really just be intentional about making sure that we take the time to over communicate, because though it may seem like a lot on the front end, I promise you, it will save you so much time, energy, and resources on the back end, so that you've got a well-oiled machine. And all of a sudden, you don't have an issue of people quiet quitting. You got open filled positions because nobody's sticking around. If they feel like what they have to contribute, their gift, their talent is being cultivated, and that they understand the bigger purpose of the company, and they feel like they have a psychologically safe enough place to speak and share their thoughts and ideas, you don't have a problem trying to get talent. You now will not only retain top talent, you'll
Absolutely.
attract it.
You've said that you can't self-anoint as an ally. You have to earn it. In the context of revenue-generating teams, what would you say are specific receipts or evidence that prove a leader has successfully become an ally in their team? And how do these receipts correlate with revenue performance?
One of the things that I would have the leader think about is how you'll know if you're knocking it out the park is just to look at your team, right? Do you have a team that is a team of thought leaders, right? They're thinking differently, they communicate differently, they challenge the status quo, they challenge each other, or do you have a team of sameness? Because here's the thing too, Vinay, is a lot of times and I'll talk about the states, it may be different where you're located, but we have unfortunately dumbed down this conversation so much that it has become a race or gender thing. You could have a team that is actually very diverse in race, and yet you've still trained them to be group thinkers. So now they're no longer diverse. They may look different, but they think the same. And so when I say diversity and how you can't anoint yourself as an ally, you have to earn it, it's because I want leaders to realize that the goal is to have people who don't think alike, have your same schooling, background, lived experience. They have a different generation, different gender, different in every shape, form, and fashion. Because if you get a team like that, you can't help but actually stand out because there isn't the same type of thinking, right? You're now pulling in the best of the best
Yeah.
as far as thought process is concerned, or the best of innovation and so on and so forth. Diverse teams, statistically, I'll just share a couple thoughts. Diverse teams are 35% more productive. Diverse teams are 70% more likely to capture new markets, and diverse teams are 36% more profitable. Now, I'm going to stop there. I could keep going on and on. And I would tell folks, don't take my word for it. Go Google it. Harvard Business Review, Deloitte, McKinsey, they all have enough research and data to actually allow you to go and be in awe of all the different attributes that diverse teams bring to the table. So when I make a comment saying it's not just about, oh, we've got one person who's black, one who's Asian, one who's Hispanic, one, if they all have the same way of thinking, because that's how you've trained them, they're not diverse in the best way possible. And so what I really want leaders to do is, I'll be honest with you, I just want leaders to realize the world has changed. The expectations have changed. We're a global society now, no matter where you're located. And so we as leaders have to level up. We're going to have to learn how to lead people who are not like us. And the way that you know that's working is to look at your organization. This, from top to bottom, is it an organization that all looks alike, or does each of the teams look alike, right? Or does it like, okay, we have diversity at the lower levels, but in the C-suite where the real decisions are made, we all actually look alike and have the same background and same schooling and come from the same stuff. Like you just really, that's so yesterday. What I want leaders to realize is you look at your organization only if you want to win. Now, if you don't want to win, you want to be mediocre, keep doing what you're doing. But if you want to win and set your team up to win, then that means you want to be really dogmatic and honest with yourself to look at your entire organization and make sure, do I have diversity of thought, diversity of communication, diversity of education, diversity of, yes, of race, gender, generation, that kind of thing, every single level. And have I created a space in a place that people can really bring their whole selves to work going, you know what, I love that ideas, but I think we can do it better this way and not have any fear of retribution. And so how you know it works is look at your own organization. If you don't have that level of diversity in every shape, form, and fashion, I would tell you it's probably not working. And so now the challenge that you have for yourself is, again, you can't just say, oh, I'm an ally. Rack it up. How are you ally? Tell me what you've done this week to actually show your allyship. Tell me 2 or 3 things that you've done this week. If you say you're an ally for women, great. Tell me what you've done this week that would actually back up that statement. If you're an ally of making sure that the next generation they're welcomed in your area and that you want to hear their ideas, great. Tell me 2 or 3 things you've done this week to actually support that statement. See, what tends to happen when I ask leaders that is they can't back up the statement. They just go, I'm an ally. I'm down. I love having women. I'm a girl dad. Okay, that's great, but tell me what you've done. How many women are in your voice? How many women are in your C-suite? The women that are there, what's the trajectory that you have to grow them and develop? When a woman speaks at your meeting, does everybody listen? Does nobody listen? Do people cut her off? Come on now. You're the leader, right? And so that's really where I am. You can tell I'm very unapologetic about this. I have led at the top level. I serve on boards. I'm there. And so I just know that the excuses there's many. And I think at this stage of the game, the whole world has changed. And if people want to win and keep winning, not just today, but in the future, they're going to have to really look at their leadership and the environment that they've created. And then have an honest decision with themselves, a discussion to figure out what are you going to do to change that? Because the winners will be the ones who have tapped into all of the differences and have figured out how to grow and groom them. And something simple that leaders can do, because I don't want them to feel like this is overcomplicated. You've read my book. It's incredibly simple. And I want leaders to realize you were naturally born with all of this. If you go to a playground and watch a bunch of 5-year-olds play, you can see them doing this every day. So you already were born with it. It's your natural instinct. It's life that beats it all out of us, right? And all of a sudden we start following these rules and things that may or may not work for us. But what I want leaders to realize is I don't want you to overcome it. Something, if I take it away from the work, right? Let's just keep it in its simplest form. This weekend, go take your kids and hanging out and your family and go to a place that you're not the majority and go have dinner. Or go to a culture center, or go to their art center, or go to a festival, or walk around, talk to the community. That's how you expand your mind. We do it when we go on vacation to other countries all the time. We just don't. What I want people to realize is you don't have to go on vacation to another country to get this accomplished. You can go to the next neighborhood and do the same thing, right? come in with an attitude of curiosity. So it allows you to ask questions, get to know people, understand, learn, take action. It's not that complicated. Don't make this hard.
Absolutely. In your neuroscience research, you found that certain chemicals are released in buyers' brains during the sales conversations that either foster trust or breed distrust. Now, in the B2B tech space, there is a need to nurture prospects primarily through a lot of content because distance and personal face-to-face interview conversations aren't always possible. And these forms of educational content could be in the form of emails over several months. I wonder if we could trigger those trust chemicals through written content and not just face-to-face conversations. And if so, could you tell us how that works?
Yeah, yeah. So the answer to that is yes. And how you would think about it. So a lot of times when I'm
Hmm.
talking, I am talking more face-to-face conversations, but let's use, a lot of times I will have the press will call me and ask me for a quote regarding
Hmm.
AI. What do I think about AI? Blah, blah. And AI for me, from a sales perspective, is really simple. I think that AI is going to be
Hmm.
great to help us be much more efficient, especially as salespeople. But where I don't see it taking our jobs, if you will, right now anyway,
Hmm.
is with the human connection part of it. Yes, we can use AI to make us, to give us the information that we need about, let's say if I was talking about you, AI is going to allow me to learn all kind of stuff about you, right? So when I'm having that conversation and I want to build that trust with you as quickly as possible, then I'm going to talk about things that based on what
Hmm.
AI has told me is important to you, right? The same is true if I'm doing an email. Now, I may have to be a little bit more mindful of how to do the email. But if you think of, let's just use this. I don't know if your listeners are used to the DISC
Yes.
DISC assessment, but the DISC assessment really talks
Yeah.
about your communication style, right? So when you think of an email, that's based on a communication style. And so you could use almost like putting neuroscience aside for a second. If you just use, if I'm communicating with, let's say, a deep person who's very
Hmm.
dominant, straight to the point, bullet points, don't paint me a picture or build me a clock, just tell me the time, those kind of people, then my communication needs to mirror that. If I do that correctly, by default, I'm going to raise up your chemicals because the worst thing I can do to someone who just wants bullet points is give you this 6-page email, right? That's going to drive a chemical response, sure. But that's the distrust because it's just like this. I'm not even going to read this because
Hmm.
that's not their style. So what I would say is, yes, you can raise up the chemicals by whether in any form of communication and not just physical communication, but you would also not just rely on because it's
Yeah.
not just face to face, right? And I can't watch your body language and I can't watch your facial features and your facial expression. I can't see all that, which is one of the drivers with driving up certain chemicals. Since I can't see that, then I'm going to have to rely on something else. And I am a big fan of the DISC assessment because at least that tells me your
Hmm.
communications. And if I can figure that out, then I can write this email, let's say as an example, in a way that's going to be most conducive for you. And there could be simple things that you could that can help you with that as well. Because if you don't know their disc style, then start searching them on social media or any kind of press that's out there about them, and just look at certain things about them. If they're all buttoned up, every hair is in place. Okay, their style is they're either probably a person who's really into data and analytics and that kind of information. So when I go to present that email or maybe send them a presentation or proposal, whatever, I'm going to lean a little bit more heavy into giving them statistics because everything I've read and pulled again about this person screams they like solid
Hmm.
information. Give me the facts. Great. Then that's how I'll communicate that email because that will give them a better experience when communicating with me, even though it's
Okay.
via email.
Certainly makes sense. For a lot of the same companies, B2B tech companies, they struggle with prospects who go through the entire sales process then make no decision at all. A bit like the example you first started
Mhm.
off with. From a neuroscience perspective, what's actually happening in their prospect's brain during these no decision scenarios? And how can companies structure their
Yeah.
educational approach to prevent this brain state?
Yeah. So what you'll want to do is, so
Mhm.
I'll just to put us all on the same page, there's really 5 stages of sales, right? So there's building trust and rapport. Then after I've built that trust and rapport, then I'm going
Mhm.
to ask questions, right? Because I got to figure out what your needs are. So the ascertaining their needs would be the next one. Once I understand what your needs are, then I'm going to offer up a solution, right? So present a solution is step 3. I may present a solution. You may agree with it. You may not agree with it. So that's step 4, handling the objection. Because you may go, I think that's an idea, but I don't think it's going to work for me, blah, blah, blah. And then step 5 is closing the deal. Okay. So that's the 5 stages of sale. Doesn't matter what company, country you're in. Those are usually the 5. And your brain is going through different stages for each. So now to answer your question, which is, hey, how do you work with the stage that's like indecision? Is you really want to set it up on the front end, because if they're not making a decision, it's not so much a brain chemical perspective as much as they're just not convinced that they need to make a decision right now. We've not presented this in such a way that it's making them want to make that decision. Because so there's a lot of different ways, and I would just tell people, if this is a big issue, call me, we'll figure this all out. But because there's a lot of pieces to that. Here's how you want to deal with it though on the front, is to figure out what is, like for me, I'll give you an example. When I used to coach clients and do one-on-one coaching for executives, and I was training salespeople, let's say, because I used to do that as well. What I would tell the salesperson, so let's say I'm coaching, you've called me and you want to talk to me about perhaps coaching you. Because of the way that I coach in my particular style, I know who's a good customer for me and I know who's not a good customer for me. Not every customer is a good customer. And so one of the things that I would ask if we were coaching is, because I'm going to, yes, take you through those stages, but I also don't want you to sit there in indecision. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. Nobody likes that. It's too gray, right? So what I will do is I'm going to set up the call on the front end. So I may say to you, Vinay, listen, thank you so much for calling. Here's how we're going to run. So I'm going to take, even if you called me, I'm going to take control of this conversation very quickly, right? So what I will say to you is, really, here's how I tend to do my initial consultations. 1, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions because I really want to understand what it is that you need. Because I'm not a coach for everybody. So I'm going to set it up the front way, right? I'm not a coach for everybody. So if that's okay, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions so I really understand what you need. If I get an understanding that I could in fact help you, then at that point, I will talk to you about what my pricing is and we can go through all that. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you for a decision. Right. So I'm telling you on the front end, I'm going to ask you for a decision at the end. Right. So that's one way that you can think about when you're thinking about selling to people, is to give them an agenda on the front end so they know what to expect. Right. A lot of times people don't do that because they don't want to actually ask you for a decision. Because salespeople, you would think like asking for the close and asking for the deal is something that they love, but they usually hate it. Right. Because there's a whole fear of rejection, which is a scientific situation that happens during the closing section. And so what tends to happen is people don't just come out and ask for the deal. And because they don't ask for it, they're not being rejected. And then that can drive usually a sales leader crazy, because you keep seeing this same prospect every single week. They're getting closer. And you're like, what? Why haven't they closed? And it's because the salesperson hasn't actually asked for the sale. But with that, using your example, so that's the first thing, is I'm going to set it up on the front end that I'm going to ask you on the back end, because I've just told you. Now, one way that I may ask that is, let's say, using this example still on coaching. When I'm done talking to you, I understand what you need, I've offered up a solution, I'm going to actually say that. So Vinay, listen, I really appreciate you being so open and honest. And let me repeat back to you what I've heard. So it sounds like what you're looking for is blah, 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 because of blah, 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 blah. You and I have talked about a solution which I offered up, which was blah, 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 blah. You said that you really thought that could be helpful for you. So now, really, as I told you before, I'm going to now move to the next step. So I guess the question I have for you, Vinay, is there any reason why we couldn't get started today? And you're going to say either yes, which is great for me, or you may say, actually, I'd rather, yeah. And then you're going to come around and you're going to say, can I think about it? And my comeback is going to be, hey, listen, no problem if you want to think about it. This is an important decision. But just so that I'm clear, what exactly will you be thinking about?
Yeah.
Most people don't ask that question, right? But just to let you ride off into the sunset. So then you're going to go, got to think about it because whatever. I need to ask my wife or whatever. I need to ask the dog. And so whatever it is, but that kind of boldness, I'm not saying it in a mean way. Listen, you asked me this. I gave you a solution. And now you want to ask me, think about it, no problem. But just so that I know, what are we thinking about specifically, right? Nothing wrong with asking those questions, especially if you've done everything on the front end. Because here's the thing. If I've done everything I'm supposed to do on the first 4 stages of sales, right? I've listened, I've handled the objection, I've presented a solution. If I've done everything right, I have every right to ask for the sale. It's just a different way to look at it, right? And so a lot of times people may not A lot of people, I promise you, most salespeople
Yeah.
don't actually ask for the sale. So that's problem number one. They think they ask for it, but they really don't. And so if you just get used to asking for the sale, a lot of times you're going to get the sale. Whether you get it now or you get it
Yeah.
later, you're going to get it because you asked for it. Most people don't.
Thank you for sharing that. Stephanie, how are you for time? Do you still have a bit of time to...
Good.
Okay.
I'm having too much fun with you, Vinay.
Thank you for indulging me. Stephanie, you've consistently beat billion-dollar quotas throughout your career. Most B2B tech companies struggle to scale revenue predictably from one funding round to the next. What would you say is the biggest difference between how billion-dollar leaders think about scaling versus how startup founders typically approach it?
That's a great question. I would think the difference is that startups, you're just trying to grab money anywhere, right? Because your expenses are there, and I get it. And so usually for startups or upstarts, it's just bring in the money, right? And therefore you're almost spreading yourself too thin, or you're doing too many things, or you're not saying no when you probably should, because you're just focused on trying to doing a money grab. And certainly we all can appreciate that and understand it. When you're a billion-dollar leader, you're not thinking of that. You're actually thinking about a couple different things. You're thinking where you're thinking of your ROI. So if I spend time over here, right? Time spent on one thing is time away from something else. So I must have an opportunity cost that it makes sense for me to spend time here. Otherwise, I don't need to spend time here because there's too much money at stake. So I would say the difference between the way a startup may think and a leader who's dealing with a more established company is we are very focused on where is my time best spent so that I can get the biggest return. And we're also very focused on what avenues bring me the most amount of money. And money can be different, right? It could be cold hard cash, or it could be relational money. So money can be defined several different ways. So I may spend time with courting a customer, let's say, or a prospect. And though they may not pay me as much as a different customer, but maybe their network allows me to get that deal, but then I have the potential to get 10 other deals because they're connected in their network or their community, et cetera. So that may be a good use of my time, though it may not bring in the same amount of money on the front end, but the ROI on the back end is going to be there. Whereas a startup person may go, I'm going to go talk to everybody, and then they're exhausted and burnt out. Whereas a leader who's trying to carry $1 billion quota, we can't be exhausted over everything, right? We're quick to say no to stuff because we're just looking at the time and energy that's going to be required in order to bring in that ROI. And so that's where I would say where the differences would lie. It's really how we allocate our time, or in Mince
You
as
make
well.
a really good point there. You've also led teams through major transitions like moving a company from commodity to luxury positioning. I think a lot of teams in the B2B tech space, companies really, also need to evolve their positioning as they scale. What would be your recommended approach or framework for leading revenue teams through positioning changes without losing momentum or confusing the market?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I have found, especially when you're trying, is, and this is something that I think a lot of times we don't think about, but the times that I've had to take a company that was maybe commodity focused, and now all of a sudden I want it to be more maybe a luxury experience or drive a higher yield, et cetera, is you've got to get the mindset ready. So change management, a lot of times people just think of the change of the process or the procedure, and then they totally just skip the mind part, right? I'm the person who's, okay, no, let's get their mindset in the right place first. Because I'll give you an example. If you're a person who's used to selling I'm going to make this up, $1,000 product, right? And you are used to being the cheapest in the market, and that's your thing. It's all about market share, and we're $1,000, right? Why would you buy with me? Because we're the cheapest in the market, right? We're $1,000. I see that as a mad dash to the bottom. So you never want to be the cheapest, but somebody's got to be the cheapest, right? When I'm working with companies and maybe it was $1,000 product, again, not true in private aviation, but just for the sake of this conversation. And now I need you to get that same product for the most part, and I need you to sell it for $5,000. I need to make sure that you've had a mental shift, right? Because as an employee, you're thinking, who would pay $5,000? We've always sold it for $1,000. Okay, so now what I have to do is I have to do two things. One, I have to add value to that $1,000 product, or at least a perceived value to that $1,000 product, so that people go, oh, I get why it's $5,000 now. But then once I do, that's the easy part. I've got to get the person who's used to selling it for $1,000 to mentally realize, no, it's $5,000 now. And so you have to spend so much time on their mindset. So to answer your question, I would say most people tend to just focus in on changing the process. And that's a piece of it, but I would tell you that's probably the smaller piece of it. The bigger piece is changing the mindset. And how you can actually help yourself in that scenario is to explain it's not just the what, but explain the who, what, when, where, and why. Why do we need this to be $5,000 now? What is it that, from a bigger perspective, why are we even doing this? We're doing this because here's where the market's going. Here's where we think the opportunity is. If we stay where we are, here's the percentage of market share that we can continue to gather. And to work at this particular level, or if we get up there, it's going to allow us to drive higher yield, which will put us in a different, yes, there'll be less people to work with, but less people to work with is sometimes a good thing, right? Because I now have a bigger margin, less people to work with. I don't need to deal with 1 million people at $1,000, right? I just need to deal with X amount of number of people, the $5,000. And what does that mean? We can give a higher level of service. We don't need as many. For us, we can bring in more money, and that means more perks, more benefits, more everything for you as well. So we have to tie it back to not just what's good for the business, kind of like with me and the guy in the Harley Davidson. I could just talk about the quota, which is good for the business, right? Or I could talk about the Harley, which has nothing to do with the business, but it's good for you. And most people, going back to conversations that raise up our positive chemical, the reason we like to talk about ourselves is it raises our positive chemicals, right? So if I can keep talking to you about why this matters to you, that's by default going to create an environment where I'm having a conversation that's not as hard, and it's actually much more pleasant because I'm allowing those chemicals, the feel-good chemicals, to get every time we talk.
Stephanie, I have more questions, but I do want to be respectful of your time. Please feel free to tell me to wrap up. I'll ask you 2 more questions and we're done.
Yeah, what time is it? How about we wrap?
Sure.
10 minutes.
I'll ask you 3 questions then.
Okay.
In your aviation experience, a decimal point error could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So precision was critical. For B2B tech companies building revenue operations and sales processes, what systems thinking principles from aviation do you believe they could apply to their revenue generation to make it more predictable and less prone to costly mistakes?
That's good. Because I'm not in the tech space, I didn't realize that was an issue for them. So it's really good to know. And it's funny because in the aviation space, I always tell people it's a very sexy business, but it's a low margin business, right? And so you have to know where all your dollars and cents are. So in aviation, it's the assets cost a lot of money. The fuel costs a lot of money. There's certain things that cost a lot of money. And so what we're constantly trying to do is to minimize those costs, right? So how can I get more predictability? And so if you look at, I'm trying to think of it, if I put my sales hat on or my growth hat on, if I'm looking at, okay, how do I make more? I'm going to first know that here's my big expenses, right? And in aviation, for an example, the big expenses is going to be flying that plane with nobody on it. I need to get from point A to point B to pick up a customer. But that nobody on it is detriment. It's tough, right? Because I'm flying for no expense. So what I've got to do is figure out, how do I get more people in clusters of areas so that I can connect the planes quicker, so I have less time that I'm flying with nobody on it. So I'll use that as an example. So one way to do that is to go, okay, so now let's get really focused on what groups are in this area. Where can I get some traction? How can I get people who maybe are flying commercial first class to maybe fly privately and stay? Is there certain groups that I'm not really even paying attention to? And this kind of goes back to my book about leading people who are not like you. I would tell you my next book is How to Sell to People Who Are Not Like You. And it's because when we think about growing our business, I've talked a lot about from a leadership perspective, how leading teams who are not like you allows you to retain top talent. But if you also look at your business and how do I get business from other groups, I should say, that are not traditionally who I go for, that's where your growth is. And there's the secret, everybody. Coming from a growth officer, try to figure out, where do I find business in unlikely places? It's the area that you've not looked for business before, right? That's the easiest way to do it. So from an aviation perspective, that's how we're looking at it as well. Is, okay, we're selling to the 1% of the 1%. But what if we could now just sell to the 1%? What could we do with our product to make it a little bit more accessible to more people, right? So that I can get more people in the pipeline, so I have less likelihood of flying that plane empty from point A to point B to go pick someone up. So I think on the tech side, I'm not as familiar with tech, but I would just encourage people to think of it that way is you're almost thinking of the market that you don't have, right? If we think about voting, for an example, during the election time, everybody's talking about the undecided voter or the wherever people voted in the past. But if you're smart, you're just trying to get the people who don't vote, period.
Yeah.
Just get that group to get a little bit from them, and there you win the election, right? And the same is true for also in private aviation. If I have everybody that's flying is millionaire and billionaire, well, what if I was able to actually bring it down a little bit more and open it up to more people who could fly that maybe they're not worth $1 billion, but maybe they're a good solid couple millions, you know what I mean?
Okay.
So you're almost looking for the opportunity of where there isn't somebody traveling or somebody doing it. So for tech, I would say, don't just get focused on your normal stuff. Actually, your best thing is, where do I find business in unusual places? I'll give you, if you have time, I'll give you an actual live story in that. So when I used to sell private aviation services, I had the southeast as when I was a sales rep. And so I remember thinking, okay, I've got to get more business in. And so in private aviation, there's the 1%, the A-list celebrities, the sports people. There's the normal place you would think to go buy and sell private aviation, high profile folks. And so I've got to be there with everybody else trying to compete in that space. But my thing was always, where else could I go? All the fish are biting here and I need to be there. But where is there fish biting that nobody's going over there? And so I did some research and figured out that because I could get information to know who had private jets. So I did all that to figure out in the Southeast who has private jets. And I narrowed it down because if I think about a private jet, the reason why, other than you being a high profile person for security reasons, you may fly private. But a normal person who's flying privately, it could be just because it's easier to get to where I'm going. So now I'm backing into it thinking, okay, who would need to get someplace that's way away from an airport? Oh, okay, plants. Nobody builds a plant in a neighborhood. So a plant is way out there. It's not near anything. Okay, what kind of plants would be way out there, but yet they'd still travel on? So as I started to back into it, what I realized was, okay, who would be out there is like farmers, but like meat farmers, not produce farmers, but like chicken farmers or pig farmers or that kind of thing, because meat's expensive. So what I realized is that there was a chicken farmer plant in my region that had a private jet, because I could tell by the public information, but I'd never heard of them. Like nobody had heard of them. So I remember calling them up saying, I know that you guys have a private jet. I'd love to come out and visit. And the gentleman said to me on the phone, really? Nobody's ever come out to visit us, right? And I was like, oh, yes, I can't wait to see you and meet everybody, blah, blah, blah. So I get on a plane. And by the time I got there, I realized why nobody's ever done this, because it was like plane, trains, and automobiles just to get to where they were. But I finally got there, and they had a gift for me. They had a gift for me because nobody had ever come out to see them. I understand why, nevertheless, right? So I get this gift, sit down with the team, and I find out, Vinay, that yes, they have one private jet, but they have this duck season hunting situation that they do for their board members and their top suppliers and blah, 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 where they need 20 jets every quarter. Okay. So though they own one jet, they chartered 20 jets a quarter. Do you know that company they didn't just become my number one customer because nobody had gone to see them. So it was an easy win for me. They became the company's number one customer because nobody had ever called on. So to answer your question for tech is always don't get outside of the box. That's why you need diversity of thought, right? Don't just go where the fish are biting. Everybody's there. Try to figure out where can I find business in unusual places? And you just start backing into your thought process, and that's going to take you someplace nobody else is at. And you're really just trying to become first in market. I had enough of a runway that, yes, I went to visit them. And so at that point, all 20 planes are for me now because nobody else has ever gone out there to visit them. It was the easiest win ever. Brilliant. You just have to think different.
In the intersection of ally leadership and revenue generation, are there perhaps a couple of areas that don't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I'm not sure if you could elaborate.
Sure. From your perspective, at the intersection of ally leadership and revenue generation, are there perhaps a couple of topics or areas that people don't seem to talk about very much? If so, what would they be?
Yeah. What I would just say is where the two intersect, in my opinion, because I always say it's not about DEI, it's about ROI.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I get really focused. And so when people think of with my book being called Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You, they may think it's DEI. And I would say it has nothing to do with DEI. It's an ROI book. If you're a leader, you have to know how to lead people who are not like you. We've got 6 generations at work. So
Yep.
that's unheard of, right? Every generation has a different perspective and expectation. So most of us, we're used to dealing with our generation, but it's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more complicated when you're trying to lead generations that don't think like you and have the same perhaps philosophy of work like you. Then we've got
Mm-hmm.
women as the majority of the marketplace or a population. And so women are different. That changes the dynamics of work because women think different and communicate different. Then you've got, at least in the States, all the ethnic races growing, non-ethnic race
Mm-hmm.
shrinking. So that changes the dynamics. You've got LGBTQ plus, you have people with neurodiversity, you have people with disabilities. You've got a whole lot of people working in today's workforce. So they're not like you and they're not like each other. So the reason that I think the intersectionality is not about DEI, but ROI is if I can get all different types of people, which means I have to be a leader who has to know
Mm-hmm.
how to lead all different types of people. And that's why I spend so much time with the book talking specifically to leaders, because I know it's not necessarily something that they're used to. But if you would just ask, listen, learn, take action, open up your mind, what you're going to find is your job is to pull out the best talent, right? Our job as leaders is to put the right people in the right place to get the right result. That's the job. And so the way that you set yourself up to win, I already gave the statistics of
Mm-hmm.
what diverse teams, how they just outperform traditional teams. So how you as a leader are going to set yourself up to win is to create an environment where you have the differences. Now it's hard to lead differences. We don't talk about that. We're talking about having different teams, but we don't talk about if
Yep.
nobody thinks alike, nobody thinks alike, right? So you have to know how to manage and lead all of that differences. But man, oh man, when you do, the research is clear, right? The statistics are clear. You're going to get a better result from your team. That's going to give you the competitive advantage because you have a team that's going to be more innovative. They're more challenging each other. They're more quick to market, right? All those stats are there, but you only get that if you know how to lead a team that is full of differences. But if you can do that, not only do you have a competitive advantage, you have a team that's going to hit the goal almost pretty much, I'd say, every time, all the time. But the piece that we don't talk a lot about, which we should, is, excuse me, that changes your
Mm-hmm.
marketability as a leader, right? We all want to be promoted and get to that next level of ourselves, right? And so if you're a person that all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, you give Vinay the team and no matter what team it is, he's going to get that team crushing it on all cylinders. That changes the marketability. Why? Because people are like, I need to get Vinay because Vinay makes things happen. And so now all of a sudden you become, when names and discussions are being had and you're not in the room about who should get the next project or what promotion we should give or who we should send overseas, if you're not in the room, but your results are in the room, that's what I mean by that changes your marketability. So how the two interact is I just refuse to have a team that all is the same,
Yeah.
sea of sameness and group thinking. I just know that I just know what I know. I get a better result if I have complete opposite people who are challenging each other and challenging me. I don't know everything. If I can do that, then based on my experience, it is guaranteed I'm going to get a better
Yeah.
result. So that's how the two interact. It's not about DEI. It is about ROI
Thank you for that.
performance.
A great point you make there. To wrap up, Stephanie, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
So if I was listening to the episode, the thing that would really resonate with me is, and hopefully I've driven this point home, is I, as a leader, have to realize that the world has changed. And I have one way of doing things, but that's not the only way. It's just one way. And so for me, as a leader who's constantly wanting to be better and to grow and to be more successful and drive better results, what I realize is that next real big wave of growth for today's modern leader is going to be the leader who knows how to lead everybody, right? Every race, every creed, every gender, every generation. That's going to be your competitive advantage. So my takeaway is I have to have an honest conversation with myself as to, am I that leader? Because I can become that leader if I'm not currently there. If I'm not currently there, buy the book so I can get there, right? But I've got to really realize that the whole world has changed. The expectations have changed. The workforce has changed. And I have to
Okay.
change as well in order to
Okay.
continue to be
And your
successful.
book is available on Amazon and other major book retailers. But if people are curious, want to find out more or
Mhm.
connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, so I'm on all the social channels. My call sign is at the Stephanie Chung. You can also go to my website, stephaniechung.com. And we also just launched a new online self-course program
Hmm.
on how to lead people who are not like you. And you can get that at
Okay.
stephaniechung.com/earn, EARN. That will take you directly to the training if you want to actually go a little bit deeper than the book and actually train and become that
Great.
leader that
We'll
we've been
include links
talking
to that in
about.
the show notes. Stephanie, thank you for doing this. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. I had fun.
Now,